My name is Natalie Carter. I sat alone for 3 hours and 17 minutes in the blue dress he once said, "When you wear it, everything else fades." Beside me was a glass of wine gone cold, a celebration cake no one touched, and dozens of pitying glances from the restaurant staff. And then he walked in, not alone, but with his pregnant mistress, laughing among friends. In front of them, he said, "I told you she'd wait, like a loyal dog. If it were you, what would you do? Stay silent? Cry? Or walk away like I did, not to escape but to disappear from his life in a way he'd never see coming?" If this story touches a wound inside you, leave a comment. Hit follow so you won't miss the journey I'm about to share. Not one of revenge, but of becoming myself again. I used to be Natalie Jensen, assistant food editor at Harvest and Hearth, a well-known magazine in New York, where tasting sessions stretched past midnight and the test kitchen always smelled like browned butter. I loved that job with a quiet, passionate devotion. Some afternoons I'd stand for hours trying to perfect the crisp on a plum galette crust, or revise every sentence in a feature for the Flavors of Memory section. I once believed that food wasn't just about taste, it was storytelling. About where we come from, who we love, and sometimes, what we lose. I met Ethan Carter at a food media conference in Brooklyn. He didn't look like the men who usually lingered in the culinary world. No apron, no knives, just a gray suit, a navy tie. And the way he spoke made it seem like everything was within his grasp. Ethan was one of the rising young attorneys at a firm expanding into intellectual property. And I was one of many drawn to a kind of confidence easily mistaken for sincerity. 3 months later we moved in together. 6 months after that came the sapphire engagement ring I'd once joked looked like blueberry jam. And not even a year after that, I walked away from everything I was building, unfinished articles, a sensory training class I was preparing to teach to follow Ethan to Austin, where he had just been promoted. "Just 2 years, Natalie," he said the day I signed my resignation. "Once I'm settled here, we'll go back to New York. You can open a studio. I promise." Austin wasn't a bad place to begin again, but I never really began again. I became the wife of a lawyer. People called me Mrs. Carter at his office cocktail parties, asked if I taught cooking or had a blog. Ethan would usually laugh it off. "She's really talented, but it's just for fun." And so I laughed along. I started spending more time in the kitchen, not to create or explore, but to serve. The food I made was no longer photographed for articles, only casually complimented by my husband's coworkers. "This carrot cake is amazing, Natalie. Ethan's a lucky man." I used to think those words meant validation. Every year I'd bring up the small studio, a place where I could teach and write, a place where I could be myself without scheduling around Ethan. But he always delayed. "Wait until I make partner, then we'll have room to invest. The economy's unstable, maybe next year." "You've built a great community here, Natalie. Who needs New York anymore?" I started writing again, small blog posts, recipes for a few local websites, but Ethan often complained when I spent too much time on it. "That's not real work, you know, don't get your hopes up." I began to doubt myself. Maybe I was being too dreamy, maybe what I wanted wasn't realistic. I convinced myself of that. That taking care of Ethan, throwing parties for his colleagues, managing the household, was also a form of achievement. And every time he smiled as I placed the perfect soufflé on the table, I thought, maybe this is enough. But deep down, I knew. I wasn't writing the way I used to, wasn't cooking with feeling anymore, and couldn't feel who I was when I wasn't standing next to Ethan. There was one evening I still remember. I don't recall if it was his birthday or some important client dinner. I spent 3 days planning the menu, 2 days prepping, and 6 hours cooking non-stop. When the dinner ended and the guests were gone, I asked Ethan, "Did the duck taste better than last time?" He raised the glass, took the final sip, then met my eyes. "As long as it's not raw, it's better than last time." I smiled. The burns on my hands faded faster than his admiration ever had. Over time, he spent more and more hours at the office. Evenings together became rare, and when we did sit down for dinner, he was often glued to his phone, answering work emails. I'd sit across from him, eating in silence, trying to share a new recipe idea or something I wanted to write about. But his eyes would always drift past me, like I was speaking about something far away. I began keeping recipes for myself, wrote them in the leather notebook my aunt had given me. Maybe that was all I had left of Natalie Jensen. The rest of me had become Mrs. Carter, full-time, the woman who showed up on cue, smiled the right way, cooked flawlessly, for people who had no idea she once dreamed of something bigger than a beautiful kitchen in a suburban home. That's how I lived for 12 years. And until that night at Sage and Ash, when I heard Ethan say, "I told you she'd wait like a loyal dog," I hadn't realized how long I'd been retreating from my own life without even noticing. I walked out of Sage and Ash without looking back. Ethan's laughter and that of his friends still echoed behind me, clinging to me like a stain I couldn't wash out. As I stepped into the car, I was still wearing the blue dress he once called almost elegant. By then, the pain had long since drained my tears. All that remained was a cold emptiness. When I got home, I paused at the door for a few seconds. Something felt wrong. The warm yellow light spilling out from inside had a strange, unfamiliar glow. I opened the door and stepped inside. Everything was suspiciously tidy. The gray sofa had been moved to the corner wall, and the coffee table no longer had any Saveur magazines. Instead, it held a vase of fake flowers and a few hardcover books in neutral tones, the kind of props people use in staged model homes. I stood still for a moment, then called out, "Ethan?" No one answered, but I heard a noise from the kitchen. He was standing there, holding a glass of water, and didn't look the least bit surprised to see me. "Redecorating?" I asked, my voice light, like I was chatting with a neighbor. Ethan set the glass down on the granite counter. "I was going to tell you after dinner, but I guess now it doesn't really matter." I braced myself against the counter, eyes locked on his face. "Tell me what?" "Grace and I found a place in Charlotte. 3-bedroom house with a backyard near a private preschool." I froze. 1 second, 2, and then everything crashed down like a ceiling giving way. "Grace is pregnant?" I asked, slowly, as if each word had to be cut from my throat. He remained silent, eyes locked on mine, devoid of guilt, filled only with cold, brutal certainty. "How long?" I asked. "About 8 months. He spoke as if listing a fact. "We kept it quiet because, well, work, public attention, but Grace can't hide it much longer." I let out a bitter laugh, more breath than sound. "And what about me? How long were you planning to keep me quiet?" Ethan sighed. "It's awkward, I know, but we both saw this coming, didn't we? You haven't really been happy here. I've been buried in work. We've been growing apart for a long time." I clenched my fists. "No, Ethan. I've been here. Every single night. Beside you, in the kitchen, out in the yard, at every office party where I didn't belong. The only one who hasn't been here is you." He looked down, ran his hand across the countertop. "I want this to go smoothly. Grace doesn't want a scandal. Neither does the firm." I let out a laugh, this time out loud. "For the firm's reputation, not for me. Not for this marriage?" He pulled a stack of papers from his leather briefcase. "This is the divorce agreement. My attorney drafted it. No asset disputes. You'll keep the Range Rover, I'll keep the house. You'll also receive transitional support for 6 months. And where exactly am I supposed to live during those 6 transitional months? There's an apartment in Round Rock. I've already rented it. Fully furnished, near a grocery store. There's a small office where you can work on your blog. It's not bad." I reached out for the papers, flipping through a few pages. Every detail had been carefully arranged, as if this had been planned for a long time. "So," I said, voice low, "you have a new woman, a new child, a new house, and a whole plan to erase me from your life, neatly packaged like a real estate deal." I placed the divorce file down on the counter. "And you think I'm going to accept it all and vanish like a breeze?" Ethan looked me in the eye, for the first time visibly shaken. "I don't want to hurt you, Natalie, but this is what's best for everyone." I stepped closer, reached into the drawer beneath the kitchen counter, and pulled out a pair of fabric scissors. Then I cut the fake flower arrangement he had placed on the table, one stem at a time, petals falling onto the white tile floor. "Pretty," I said, "but no scent, no life. Just like everything you've called stable for the past 12 years. Ethan didn't say a word. I stood up, pulled out the secondary bank card he had given me, the one labeled emergency use only, and placed it on the table. "Thanks for the generosity," I said, "but I think I'll find my own place this time. And this time, no one else gets to make the plans for me." I signed every page of the divorce file with a decisiveness that surprised even me. No tears, no hesitation. Ethan's attorney sat across the table, quietly sliding each sheet toward me, occasionally glancing up as if waiting for a reaction, a protest, a question, even a flicker of doubt. But there was nothing, just me and the pen. One round, done. When I left the law office, a soft April rain had started to fall. Austin's kind of rain. Not too cold, but enough to make a person feel small. I looked up at the gray sky, thinking about 12 years of my life folded into a cream-colored file, and the final words from the lawyer. "Are you sure you don't want to contest anything?" I'd already fought enough. Quietly, hopelessly. Now I just wanted to leave in silence. A few days later, I quietly took my Tiffany wedding ring to an old jewelry shop tucked behind the downtown strip. The owner, a silver-haired woman named Maggie, held up the sapphire, studied it, then looked at me with an expression that wasn't curiosity. It was gentle understanding. "You're sure?" she asked. "The market's not what it used to be, but this stone is lovely. Someone will want it." I looked at the sapphire one last time. 12 years ago I'd seen it under stage lights, my hands shaking as Ethan knelt before me. 12 years later, it rested in my palm like evidence of a promise long since hollowed out. "As long as it covers a one-way ticket far away," I said, trying to keep my voice from breaking. I transferred every cent of my remaining savings, just over $17,000, including what I got for the ring, into a new account under the name Natalie Jensen, my birth name. I canceled the secondary credit card Ethan had given me, shut down all social media accounts, and deleted any apps that could track my location. Then I booked a one-way ticket to Portland, Oregon. No one knew why I chose Portland. Even I wasn't entirely sure at first. But when the name came to mind, I thought of my late aunt, Aunt Harriet, who had passed away 7 years ago. A woman who never married, lived alone in a wooden cabin deep in the southern forests near Portland. The one who taught me how to bake apple pies when I was 12, and once whispered in my ear, "You don't need to be soft to be loved, Natalie. You just need to be honest with yourself." I boarded the flight at 5:30 a.m., carrying one small suitcase, my laptop, an old recipe notebook, and 3 changes of clothes. I brought nothing else. No wedding photos. No keepsake gifts, not even the perfume Ethan used to buy me for every birthday. I wanted to be light. Light enough to disappear if I needed to. When the plane landed, Portland's sky was still weeping a fine drizzle, as if the city itself had chosen its own quiet way to greet me. I rented an old brown sedan from a local company. No GPS. No Bluetooth. Just AM radio and a folded paper map stuffed in the glove compartment. The rental clerk, an older man named Glenn, gave me a puzzled look. "Traveling solo, miss?" I smiled. "Let's call it that." I drove south toward a small town called Silver Ridge, where Aunt Harriet had once lived. Her old cabin now belonged to someone else, but I found a different one nearby, smaller, quieter, tucked between 2 pine-covered hills. The owner was a widow named Laura, around 60, with salt and pepper hair and a voice warm like a fireplace. "I usually rent it out seasonally," she said as she showed me the little pinewood floored kitchen. "But if you're thinking long-term, I can offer a good rate." "I just need it quiet enough to remember who I am," I answered, my voice almost too honest, enough that she paused and looked at me for a long moment. I moved in the next day. Nothing fancy, a single bed, an old gas stove, a scratched pine table, windows facing the forest and the sound of owls at night. But to me it was a space untouched by the past. Each morning, I woke early, made coffee with a pour-over, and sat on the porch listening to the wind threading through the trees. In the afternoons, I rewrote old recipes, folding the paper with care, as if tidying up old memories. I chopped onions for no reason, kneaded bread dough just to feel something in my hands. Some days I didn't cook at all, like the stove go cold, like a long exhale. No one knew where I was. Ethan couldn't find me. Even Clara, my best friend since college, received only one message. "I'm okay. I'll call when I'm ready to talk. Please don't look." I don't know how long I'll stay here. A week? A month? A year? I'm not making plans. I'm not setting goals. I am simply staying still, for the first time in 12 years of being Ethan Carter's wife. And in that small wooden cabin among the pine trees, where no one asked what I needed, where no one expected me to serve dessert, I began to feel something I never thought I'd feel again. Silence that wasn't terrifying. It was a beginning. One weekend afternoon, as I was picking apples at the farmer's market in downtown Silver Ridge, I heard someone call my name, the full name that few people still remembered. It seemed until that point I had always called him Dad, someone who'd literally ever cared. The way he said it, the full name that few people still remembered. Natalie Jensen? I turned around and met the bright eyes and half-surprised, half-delighted smile of Monica Jensen. Not family, a name twin, but once a classmate from culinary school in New York more than 15 years ago. Monica, I said, stunned. Oh my God, it's really you! She pulled me into a hug, still keeping the habit of starting with an embrace and a gentle pat on the back, the way culinary students are taught, steady but without leaving a mark. We sat down at a cafe near the market. I ordered a cappuccino and Monica asked for ginger tea. She studied me more closely as I briefly told her about leaving Austin. You dropped off the map, she said, tilting her head. But you look peaceful. I'm glad to see you again. I smiled, probably the first genuine smile I'd had in a while. And you? I remember you once said you wanted to open a cooking school. I did, right here in town. She pulled out her wallet, took out a business card and placed it in my hand. Willow Hearth Culinary Studio. Small classes, mostly women in midlife, divorced, widowed, lost, looking for something, that kind of thing. I gently traced the card. Soft cream color embossed lettering. Simple, but refined. I'm short a teacher for a special class, Flavors of Resilience. It's a short-term course mainly focused on healing through food, Thursdays once a week. If you're interested, I hesitated. It's been a long time since I worked professionally. But you haven't forgotten, Monica interrupted, her gaze warm but firm. Someone like you doesn't forget. You were just forced to set it down for a while. I stayed quiet, but that night, back at the cabin, I opened the old wooden box, where I'd kept a few recipe journals, a kitchen towel embroidered with my name in red thread, and the chef's knife set Ethan never let me use for unfussy dishes. I sharpened the blades against a whetstone. Slowly, evenly, like brushing dust off memories. The following week I showed up at Willow Hearth. The class had only 6 people, all women, all over 35, all with stories in their eyes. One had divorced after 40 years of marriage. One had just lost her husband in a car accident. One had recently learned her husband was cheating while she was undergoing breast cancer treatment. But inside Monica's wide, sunlit kitchen, I didn't see brokenness. I saw hands, shaking but determined bowls, ceramic bowls, and the courage to begin again. The first session, I taught them to make white bean soup with dill and lemon zest, a dish I once cooked for Aunt Harriet during her final autumn. Nothing fancy, I said as their eyes turned toward me. Something soft meant to comfort a tired soul. I began writing again, not articles or culinary reviews, just small pieces, reflections, memories, recipes, woven with emotion. I named the blog The Quiet Flame. No profile picture, no real name, only a quiet voice speaking into a noisy world. I wrote about the rosemary bread I'd learned from an Italian friend who had passed away, about nights in the cabin when I baked apples just to fill the room with warmth, about standing over a small gas stove, arms aching from kneading dough but heart feeling less empty. And then I wrote about the white bean soup, the first dish I taught after returning to the kitchen, along with Carol's story. With her permission. That post was shared more than I expected. One anonymous comment read, "I've never cried reading a recipe." Until today. Monica read the post and placed her hand on my shoulder. "You're not just teaching cooking, Natalie, you're teaching people how to return." Her words caught in my throat. I started teaching more regularly. Each class focused on something simple, but layered with meaning. A roasted sweet potato salad from a cancer survivor, a traditional almond cake a student had learned from her grandmother. I was no longer the instructor, I was part of them. And the kitchen, once again, was no longer a place to serve. It was a place to return to. I bought a new leather notebook and wrote down each person's name, each recipe, each fragment of story they told. Not to archive, but to remind myself that broken doesn't mean gone. I didn't expect much when I posted the Southern Squad egg custard tart on the quiet flame. Just a rainy afternoon, when I suddenly remembered the dessert Aunt Harriet made every Christmas. I wrote a short memory to go with it, about those years in her narrow kitchen, watching her stir milk, egg yolks, and sugar with a patience that felt like reviving something fragile. I don't know who shared it first, but the next morning the inbox was flooded with thank you letters. People sent photos of the tart they'd made, shared childhood memories with mothers, grandmothers, and themselves in small kitchens. And then I got a message from Southern Living. They wanted to interview me for their new Voices from the American Kitchen column. They didn't need my real name if I wasn't ready. I sat in front of the screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to back away, the other part whispered, "This one is yours? No one else gets to say no for you." I said yes. The interview came out a week later with a simple title: The Quiet Flame, Healing Through Egg Custard, and The Unspoken. I didn't use the Carter surname, I signed it Natalie Jensen, and in the short bio line I wrote, former food editor, rediscovering life through forgotten recipes. I didn't add a link, I didn't share it on any social platform, but within 2 days people had found the blog, shared it widely, even on culinary forums, feminist groups, and divorce recovery communities. Letters poured in from everywhere. A widow in Alabama wrote that the tart reminded her of her daughter's last birthday. A single mom from Montana said her 10-year-old had made the tart and gave it to her because you're like Miss Natalie. I read each word, each story, and felt myself being seen, not for status, but for how deeply I'd reached someone's heart. I didn't think Ethan would ever find out, but I underestimated how closely he tracked the things no longer his. On Monday morning I opened my rarely used inbox, and there it was. His name. Subject line: writing on someone else's name? The message was short. Classic Ethan. I see you're using my last name to gain attention. Looks like the anonymous cooking blog is now conveniently discovered. Be careful, Natalie. My career's entering a critical phase. There was no congratulations, no concern, only a veiled threat dressed up as risk management. A few hours later, another message came in, this time from a different email address. But I recognized the name instantly. Grace Nolan Carter. Her words weren't as cold as Ethan's, but they were sweet, like honey laced with sleeping pills. I'm writing not to cause conflict, but to make a goodwill request. Ethan is about to be nominated for a federal district judgeship, a prestigious position his entire family has long hoped for. The press is starting to look into past relationships, and every detail can be scrutinized. I hope you understand how important silence is at this moment. We ask that you refrain from mentioning Ethan or sharing any information that could create misunderstandings about his private life. At the bottom was an e-signature. Grace Nolan Carter, J.D. Senior Legal Counsel, Nolan and Carter Law Group. The screen glowed in silence. I didn't blink. In my head, Ethan's old words echoed. You know that writing thing isn't a real career. And yet now, it was those not real words of mine that had them scared. I printed both letters, placed them in a plain white envelope, not to respond, but to remember. That afternoon, when Monica dropped by the cabin with a baked apple pie, I showed her the letter. What are you going to do? She asked, setting the pie on the table, her eyes full of concern. I opened the drawer, pulled out my hard leather notebook, the one I used to record recipes and short pieces I had never published. I'm going to do exactly what they fear, keep telling stories. Monica looked at me for a moment, then smiled softly. I've always believed, those who've been silent too long, when they finally speak again, no one can stop them. I don't know what made me agree. Maybe it was Monica's gentle encouragement, or a sleepless night after reading Grace's email, or maybe it was the feeling that it was time to stop hiding. When Women in Food and Fire, the annual conference gathering female chefs, food writers, and culinary content creators from across the country, invited me to speak in the Fire We Carry session, For over an hour I hovered over the email until I finally clicked accept. I chose to fly to Santa Fe on a small domestic airline. No fanfare, no one waiting, just me, an old suitcase, and a speech, folded in thirds. Monica helped me choose an outfit, a wine-colored linen dress and an herb-mattered scarf. Simple, but impossible to confuse with anyone else. The conference was held at a resort nestled in red desert hills, where yucca flowers lined the stone paths and the air smelled like dry earth, roasted chiles, and skillet-baked cornbread. I arrived early, attended a few panels, took notes, quietly observed. Even though the quiet flame had its own readers now, I still felt like someone on the outside. I had never truly been called industry, and that humility strangely made me feel free. Until I walked into the main hall for the rehearsal and saw Nolan and Carter Law Group displayed clearly on the LED screen behind the stage. Ethan. A few minutes later I saw him, same tall figure in a tailored suit, same neatly combed hair and that smile reserved for public appearances. He stood beside the organizers, shaking hands warmly, scanning the room like it belonged to him. I pulled back behind the curtain, heart pounding. I wasn't afraid of him, not the way I used to be, but I was afraid of that old feeling returning. The one that made me small. The one that pressed me into the version of myself he had once designed. Monica texted. You're still going on stage, right? I looked down at my speech. A handwritten line I had added at the last minute stood out like a thread. Not to recount a marriage, but to tell the story of coming back. When the spotlight hit the main stage the next afternoon, I stepped forward with a strange calm. The big room was quieter than I expected. Sometimes respect doesn't make a sound. My name is Natalie Jensen, I began, voice even, and I was once the woman who waited 3 hours in a luxury restaurant, wearing the dress my husband once said made me look almost elegant. A few whispers stirred, but I didn't pause. He arrived with 3 colleagues and a woman 10 years younger than me, and when he saw me still sitting there, he said to them, "Told you, she'll wait," like a loyal dog. That day I didn't walk away out of anger, I walked away because I finally understood I was no longer part of my own story. I told them about the Tiffany ring I sold to buy a ticket to Portland, about the wooden cabin among pine trees, about the women in my cooking class, women who had lost much but never lost themselves, about the blog I wrote in silence, about the egg custard tart once dismissed as a basic dessert but carried someone's lifetime inside. If anyone asks me, "Do you think you used your ex-husband's last name to become popular?" My answer is no. I used my silence to gather back every piece of myself I had once dropped. A single clap rang out, then another, and then the entire room stood. I don't know when I started crying. I only knew I no longer saw Ethan anywhere in that room, even if he was still there, watching from the shadows. After the talk, as I stepped down from the stage, a group of reporters approached. The first question came, direct and clear. "Ms. Jensen, can you confirm whether what you just shared refers to Mr. Ethan Carter, the recent federal judge nominee?" I stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then I smiled, gentle but steady. My story is not about him, it's about me. And I think it's time we start caring more about those who survived the silence than those who created it. I walked past them, past the voices calling after me. I was rearranging the pantry in the cabin when I heard a car stop in the driveway. Not Monica's engine. Not Glenn's delivery van. It was too smooth, too quiet, too perfect for the rugged forest road. I stepped outside, wiped my hands on my apron. Ethan was already there, waiting, expression unreadable. Still in a neat charcoal suit and navy tie, but this time, the tie was crooked, the jacket wrinkled at the sleeves. His face looked darker, tired, but he still carried that familiar composure. The air of someone who once believed every room revolved around him. "May I come in?" he asked, as if this were a casual visit. I opened the door but didn't invite him to sit. He pulled out a chair himself, sat at the pine wood table where I had first written down recipes after leaving Austin. He looked around, at the shelves, the teacup still steaming on the table. "This place, it looks like you." After a moment, he said plainly, "Grace left." I didn't look surprised. Rumors had spread since the Santa Fe conference that Grace couldn't handle the media pressure, had left Charlotte with the child, left no address, no relief. No regret, only a quiet sense that this was exactly where I needed to be. I tried reaching her, Ethan continued, but Grace, she doesn't want to come back. She said she can't live in a relationship where the truth always has to be hidden. I looked up. Maybe this time you should believe her. He was quiet, then said slowly, "I know I have no right to ask anything, but the boy, he needs someone normal, someone steady. I can't work and take care of him alone. I don't know how." His gaze held something I'd never seen in him before. Despair. "You've always known how to keep things standing." I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "Like the way I used to hold you together?" I walked to the small bookshelf, pulled out a simply bound stack of papers. "My legal name change." I placed it in front of him. "Do you know what this is?" Ethan picked it up, skimmed the title. There was a pause. "Natalie Jensen," he read. "You really did it." I once thought keeping the Carter name was the last thing I had left from the marriage, like holding on to an old key, even when there's no door left to open. But I was wrong. I don't owe you anything, not your reputation, not your child, and especially not the responsibility of healing what you broke in someone else. He bowed his head, hands clasped together, silent for a long time. "I never thought you'd go this far," he whispered. I laughed, not mocking but releasing. Neither did I, but I left because if I stayed, I wouldn't have been me anymore. "Is there anything you need me to do?" "No, what you need to do starts with being honest with yourself. And that, Ethan, no one else can do for you." I walked him to the door. He paused on the wooden step, glancing around the quiet scene. The rustling pine leaves, the scent of baking bread still hanging in the air. "It's really peaceful here," he murmured. "I never thought you'd find peace in a place like this." I didn't have a clear plan when I started. No floor blueprint, no detailed cost breakdown, certainly no 5-year vision. But I had a small wooden house by a forest road, a kitchen I had stood beside for months, baking memories back to life, and a growing community of women who kept coming to class every Thursday. So I gave it a name, Home Fire. No big sign, no fancy website, just a piece of old wood Monica painted with white letters, Home Fire, a kitchen to return to, a single room used as a classroom, a long table built from salvaged wood, 6 chairs with burnt earth-colored fabric. The fridge sat in the corner, spice racks hung low so everyone could reach. Every kitchen tool had a warm wooden handle, every potholder hand-picked by me. No two the same. I opened the first class at the end of October, just as squash season peaked. The session's theme, cooking for yourself. Nothing elaborate, just a pot of pumpkin soup, hand-torn bread, and herbal tea. "This isn't a class to turn you into great chefs," I said, as the first students, mostly women between their 30s and 60s, took their seats. "It's here to remind us what it feels like to be in a kitchen without needing to prove anything to anyone." Some smiled, some stayed quiet. I divided Home Fire into 3 parts: weekend cooking classes, open writing sessions on Wednesday afternoons, and kindling group on Tuesday evenings. A loosely structured circle where anyone could share what they carried: sorrow, anger, hope, or a cake recipe they'd never dared to try. I wasn't a therapist. I was someone who listened, while peeling onions, marinating meat, or lining up cookies on a baking sheet. I learned how to hold silence without interrupting. And sometimes, a nod amid melting butter did more than any expensive treatment ever could. The Quiet Flame, the blog I once wrote under anonymity, had now become a gentle shadow I no longer needed to hide from. After the Santa Fe speech, I finally put my real name at the top. Letters arrived every day. Some people sent pictures of meals they made for my posts. Some told stories of divorcing after 30 years with a husband who always said their cooking was bland. Some wrote only one line: "I read your post and realized I can still start over." One morning I received an email from Hearth and Table, the food magazine I once dreamed of writing for when I was in New York. The new editor-in-chief, a woman named Samira, had a voice over the phone filled with that rare optimism held only by those who still believe writing can ease the world. "We'd love for you to write a recurring column," she said. "Not the top 10 holiday dishes type, but real stories. You have a way of telling things that makes people stop and taste, not just the food but their lives." I thought about it, then nodded. I titled the column Cooking Through Silence. The first piece I submitted was about crispy fried chicken and lemon honey sauce, a dish one of my students made the day she filed for divorce. In it, I didn't just write the recipe, but how her hands trembled as she cut the chicken breast, how she broke down crying when she smelled something familiar she hadn't allowed herself to remember in years. The piece was widely shared. I wasn't surprised. I knew food wasn't just taste, it was memory, shelter, a way we touch each other when every other language breaks. At night, back at the cabin, I sat by the small hearth reading handwritten letters, some written in purple fountain pen, some with family recipes folded inside. I kept each one in an old tin box, noting the date and the scent I recalled when reading it. Monica stopped by one snowy afternoon, holding a bottle of warm apple wine. She looked around the home fire space and smiled softly. "I used to think you'd go back to New York," she said. "I did. But not the city. I went back to myself." She raised her glass, gently clinked mine. "And this time no one gets in the way." I smiled, watching the fire rise in the oven, filling the air with almond and cinnamon, not because I had something to prove, but because I was coming alive, bit by bit, in the very kitchen I rebuilt from pieces I thought were lost. The night wind swept through the pines behind the studio, carrying the scent of fresh snow and forest earth. I sat on the long wooden bench by the stove, holding a half-empty glass of red wine, warmth from the nearby oven seeping into the wool on my shoulders, making it smell like baked goods and faintly charred wood. Winter nights in Silver Ridge weren't loud, no traffic, no streetlights, just the golden glow of a low-hanging pendant lamp and flickers of gas flame. On the table sat a tray of Southern slab egg custard tart I'd just pulled from the oven, the crust puffed up just right, golden brown, the filling smooth and fragrant with vanilla and nutmeg. I sprinkled a thin layer of sugar on top, then poured a little more wine. I had made this tart dozens of times over the past year, taught it in class, wrote it up for the magazine, tweaked it for vegan readers, even tried a sugar-free version once for a student undergoing diabetes treatment. But this time, I made it for a different reason. This was the one I hadn't yet made for myself. I opened a wooden drawer beside the stove and pulled out a small glass jar with an ink label, Madagascar Vanilla, Noble Vanilla, and OYNYC, 2012. The last jar of vanilla I'd brought from New York. Back then, I'd bought it with almost half a week's intern salary, hiding it in the kitchen cabinet because Ethan once frowned at the price. "It's just vanilla, who spends money like that on dessert?" I didn't argue. By then I was used to him deciding what was worthy and what was frivolous. I opened the jar. The scent was bold, slightly spicy, seeping deep into my nose, pulling back a vivid memory. A gray afternoon in that 6th-floor Brooklyn apartment, me standing by the window, waiting for the cake to rise, holding the magazine I once dreamed would one day feature my name. Back then, I believed it only counted if someone was there to eat it with me. Not anymore. I cut a slice, unhurried. The sweetness was gentle, the filling soft, warm with egg milk and real vanilla. The kind no one could forbid me from using anymore. There was a soft clatter outside. Monica had left a basket by the door, some eggs, a handful of almonds she'd roasted, and a folded note. "Snow's heavy tonight, don't go anywhere. I'll stop by in the morning, save me a slice." I placed the note on the table beside my glass. Not because I was lonely and needed someone to eat with, but because I had learned this: what we cook, what we write, what we live, doesn't need to be shared to be valid. I turned back to the kitchen, laid my hand on the smooth wood countertop, the one I'd sanded myself after our first home fire session. My hands had grown steady again with kitchen knives, ovens, the scent of yeasted dough and sautéed onions. My hands no longer shook when signing my name at the bottom of a piece, no longer hesitated when unlocking the studio doors each Saturday morning. I poured a little more wine, lifted the glass to eye level. The candlelight flickered through the glass, casting a deep red gleam onto the wall. I brought the glass to my lips, took a slow sip. The wine wasn't sharp. It was warm, soft, and enough for me to realize I didn't need someone across from me to feel that the night was whole. I looked out the window. Snow was still falling, the yard blanketed smooth, silent, like an untouched canvas. But I knew clearly I was no longer standing in someone else's painting. Dear friend, if you're still here, thank you for walking with me through the story of Natalie, the woman once called, a loyal dog who forgot who she was through 12 years of marriage, only to one day in a snow-covered kitchen find herself again, without needing anyone's permission. Maybe all of us have had a moment beside a glass of wine no one drank with us. Have felt lost in the very home we built? Have you ever been like Natalie? Ever stayed silent so long that when you finally spoke you were surprised you still had something left to say? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly want to hear your story, even if it's only a small piece of the journey you're on. And if you'd like to stay with us through more stories about family, healing, and rediscovering worth after breaking apart, don't forget to follow the channel. Sometimes the smallest things are what hold us steady through the most shaken days. We'll meet again, in some kitchen, on the next page, or in that moment when you realize you don't have to wait for anyone to begin again.